you everybody for joining. Lots of names obviously that I recognise that I've spoken to over the past few months that are obviously during those stages of considering coming into the UK. Running time will be maybe 20, 25 minutes. And as Nancy mentioned, we'll have time at the end for some Q&As. Introduction to myself, for those that haven't met me before, my name's James. I'm marketing manager here at Goodwill and been here for about 15 years, helping companies from abroad that are looking at entering the UK market. And this session is really targeted at those companies that are considering the UK as maybe a place to enter, or they're in the early stages of entering the UK market. And we'll give you some advice and tips and things to consider during that expansion journey. In terms of Goodwill as a business then, professional services business, we've been around for about 25 years, helping companies from abroad that are looking at entering the UK market. Those companies are all different shapes and sizes. Some of them are early stage startups. Some of them are retail chains. Some of them are really well-established listed companies back in their home market, but really providing all the practical things they need to enter and do business in the UK. And historically, we've targeted the Nordic region a lot, and lots of our clients are from the Nordics, but we're working increasingly across Central Europe, the USA, and other parts of the world as well. In terms of the services and the offering, 5 departments, completely flexible in terms of the range of services we do. Pick any combination of services you might need, and you can change those over time as your requirements change. In a little bit more detail, corporate governance is all the practical things you need to set up and to enter and do business within the UK. From a finance perspective, it's running the full accounting for the UK operation. So the sales ledgers, purchase ledgers, and everything in between. The HR and payroll is the full employment life cycle. So hiring any UK-based employees and all the administration associated with having those employees, including if things go wrong and you need to exit somebody for any reason, we can support you through that entire process, as long with the visa and sponsorship application side of things too, which we'll touch on a little bit later on. Payroll is payroll for UK-based employees, making sure that all the returns are done accurately and the employees are paid on time. And also virtual offices, so everything you need to have an address and telephone answering and administration support is the services we provide. If you want to just go on, Nancy, we'll go very quickly over the next slide. So the practical things to set up the UK operations, I mentioned, bank accounts, VAT registration, which we'll touch on shortly, full finance function for the UK operation, managing all the sales ledgers, using your systems if you wish for us to, full employment life cycle around employees, and then quickly through payroll and virtual offices too. So payroll being the administration of UK-based employees and virtual offices as well. If you want to just go forward past this one, Nancy, please, on to Good Company. And as I mentioned, we've been doing that for 25 years for hundreds of companies from around the world, all different shapes and sizes, and many brands, which I'm sure you'll be familiar with, different industries, and maybe they've raised a Series A, but maybe they're on Series D. It really varies from client to client, but normally they're in sort of scale-up journey looking to go into international markets. And some of the things which I'll mention today are UK specific, but also some of them will be for companies which maybe are just looking at expanding outside their home market for the first time, and then maybe they're considering which market to go into. If we go on one slide and we think why the UK specifically, so from our perspective at Goodwill, we're all about companies coming into the UK market. And obviously, a number of years ago now, we did decide to leave the EU for some reason. And as part of that process, it has been considered that, or thought that the UK maybe is more challenging to enter than other European markets. There are aspects which are, but not necessarily in all areas. And we'll touch on some of those as well as we go through this session today. If we go back, sorry, Nancy, one. For companies, again, which are coming into the UK, often it will be considered as a stepping stone to other European, to other markets. So often clients will want to end up in the US in terms of the market size, somewhere that which want to aspire to get to. And we often find that the UK is a good stepping stone to get to the US, a place where you can test yourselves really outside of your home market. In terms of the market size, 68 million people currently reside in the UK. It's one of the most densely populated markets within Europe, second only to the Netherlands. And compared to the Nordics, there's 28 million people across the whole of the Nordics, 68 million in the UK, which is a fraction of the size of that region. And in terms of our e-commerce in the UK, for those that are working, selling online, it's one of the most, if not the most advanced e-commerce countries in Europe as well. So people are used to buying online. It's something which is, again, seeing growth year upon year. From a business-friendly climate perspective, fairly easy to set up and to do business within the UK. So there's no requirement to have a UK-based director or shareholder to incorporate here. The minimum share capital is 1 share at £1. So unlike many places within Europe, there's no reason or requirement to put in a big injection of share capital to start the business. Corporation tax rate, although the default is 25% now, that has increased over the past few years. There is a low threshold of 19% for small businesses. So again, depends how profitable you are, but you might be on the 19% tax rate for corporation tax. And even at 25%, it's comparable to most places, if not less than many parts within Europe as well. From a language perspective, I'm very grateful that everybody on the call can understand English. It's the only language that I speak, and obviously English is classed as the global language in many cases. So being able to communicate within the market is very easy compared to many parts in Europe. And from a time zone perspective, obviously we're running on GMT, so we're within 1 or 2 hours for most parts, again, within Europe. So doing business is fairly easy. From a talent perspective, 4 of the top 10 universities in the world are based within the UK. So we've got Cambridge, we've got Oxford, along with the ones based in London. And many tech businesses have set up their HQs within London as well for the past years. So there's a lot of tech talent here, which is definitely an opportunity for companies from abroad that are looking at coming into the market. And when we talk about innovation, there was lots of things mentioned yesterday when the Chancellor announced the budget in the UK around innovation and what the UK is doing to support growth, specifically within the tech industries. So the UK remains the most popular destination for European startups to set up their international office, even post-Brexit. The amount of VC money that's been invested is twice anywhere else within Europe. And the budget announcements yesterday meant that 3.3 billion per year is going to be invested in digitalising the NHS. So anybody that's working in the med tech or that industry is opportunity potentially going to be coming through over the next few years. There's £100 million going to be invested into the region of Canary Wharf within London to try and turn it into a bit of a hub for life sciences. That, as well as the work that's already going in around Cambridge, they're teaming up with AstraZeneca for that. There's £100 million going into the investment within AI, artificial intelligence as well. And they agreed to embrace opportunities which are happening within that space. Fintech continues to grow year on year. And from the UK's perspective, we continue to follow the themes which are globally. So things like cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, as I mentioned, clean energy are the industries which are seeing really significant growth within the UK at the moment. And even with all that investment, we continue to support SMEs and businesses that decide to set up and innovate within the UK through schemes such as R&D tax credits. So if you are doing some of those activities within the UK, you can offset some of those costs against the corporation tax, which you may be liable to pay. And that's very attractive schemes which are taking place here. So consider that if you are going to do some innovation here in the UK. In terms of Well Connected, we've got one of the best broadband solutions across the whole of the UK. Even if maybe my connection does drop out a little bit, it is generally quite good here. 90% of the British population are accessible within a 4-hour drive if you base yourself centrally. So very easy to access the UK market. 70 airports in the UK, including Europe's busiest, Heathrow. And again, a very good rail network as well. Expect delays, but there is a very good network for the rail industry as well. So that's why we think the UK should be considered. But there is more to the UK than just London. Lots of clients will say, I need to be based in London. Basing yourself in London, you'll naturally attract higher costs for office space. You'll pay more in terms of salaries. And do you really need to be based in London when there's other industries and other regions where there is significant growth happening? So for some of our clients, they'll base themselves in Scotland, especially if they're working within the renewable energy sector or they're doing offshore. That industry is expected to increase 5-fold until the year 2030. And even if you're based within Scotland, you can still trade and you can still hire and you can still do business within the UK. Just you can expect some probably reduced overheads as a result of it. There's a whole industry around Birmingham and Manchester for manufacturing and industrial clients. We've helped a number of warehousing and industrial kind of clients set up within those regions over the past recent years too. So consider that. There's a whole hub for medtech starting up within Leeds and something called Nexus. So that's maybe something that's worth exploring. And a whole creative industry up and around Leeds. And again, it got mentioned yesterday on the budget by the Chancellor, where he said about the investment that's going into the film industry within the UK for creativity. And we are second in the UK now, only to Hollywood as a region in terms of the film industry. So there's a lot going on within that space too. Onto the next slide, if we can. Things to consider then when you come into the UK, but also just markets that you generally go into, the business structure, how you're going to set it up and what the benefits are of them, tax and obviously responsibilities around that, bank accounts, which I know there's some people on this call that have had challenges opening bank accounts over the past few months, and we'll look at that in a bit more detail. The hiring and the movement of people cross-border, especially now that we've obviously left the EU, and the movement of goods. So we'll look at those 4 of those 5 in a bit more detail. On the movement of goods, I won't say too much on it, but just bear in mind that when you are bringing product now into the UK, there will be potentially customs and duties which will be payable at the border. You obviously also have to factor in import VAT as a cost, or something which you need to consider even if you do reclaim it, but something to consider when you are moving physical product cross-border. However, lots of our clients are in the software industry, and obviously therefore it doesn't actually apply to them. If we look at routes to market then in a little bit more detail, agent distributor, not many of our clients work within that sector, that route, but you could consider it, especially if you're at the early stages of expanding to the UK. If you've got physical product, again, maybe having an agent or distributor is a good way to test the market and is fairly cost effective way to do so. You could potentially employ somebody UK based, but employ them into your overseas entity. It will depend upon the nature of the work that person is doing, but there is an option to do that potentially. And if you're looking at saving costs, then that might be a way that's looking that you might want to explore. But bear in mind, there may be a point where you will trigger a taxable presence, and at that point you will legally need to register something with Companies House and notify HMRC, and you would have a liability to pay corporation tax depending on those persons' activities. And at the point that you would trigger that taxable presence, most of our clients would either therefore decide to set up a subsidiary or a branch in the UK. And we'll look at those 2 options now as the most common ones on the next slide. So from a subsidiary, a limited company, it would be owned 100%. The shares would be by the overseas entity. The process to incorporate is fairly quick, a couple of days, and you will have that UK entity set up. There's no big injection of share capital required. As I mentioned, you can, but the minimum is 1 share at £1. It shows a commitment to the UK from an employee perspective, but also from a customer base as well. They're used to dealing with limited companies, so they would often prefer to trade through a limited as opposed to with a branch. And the main benefit, which most of our clients find, is the liability is ring fenced within the UK. So if anything does go wrong and the UK finds itself in difficulty, you can close down the operation in the future, and your overseas entity would not be exposed or at risk. So they're the main benefits, and 95% of our clients which come into the UK do decide to go for a subsidiary for those reasons. The speed, the no requirement for a UK director, the limited liability as well to keep the risk and ring fence within the UK, makes it attractive for many businesses coming here. On to the next slide. In terms of time frame, just again to give you an idea to set up within the UK, so I touched on the last one. The branch and the subsidiary as a process is fairly quick and fairly straightforward to incorporate and have the business, and 2 days for a subsidiary, maybe 3 to 4 weeks if you wish to set up a branch here. There is some more documentation that you would need to submit for the branch route. But once you've got that operation, you can then legally start to trade through it and also hire individuals into the entity. And then that process, again, is fairly quick in terms of being able to activate those extra services and to start to do business. The main delays you will face will come around the bank accounts, which we'll look at on the next slide, the VAT registration, and some of the registrations with the tax authority. They're very traditional still in the UK. Lots of the submissions will be done in paper format. So be mindful of that. And then also the movement of people. So if you do wish to bring people in from abroad, there again might be some delays around that piece, which we'll look at now on the next slide. Bank account, then I would say I get this question day in, day out from prospective clients, from companies that have already decided to set up in the UK, who face challenges on opening a bank account. So the process, as I said, to get the UK entity is fairly quick and fairly straightforward. And as I said, you can start to trade. You might have difficulties because you might have challenges getting that UK account in place. So it started maybe 10 years ago where it all kind of clamped down around KYC and money laundering, which is the problem why you will face getting that UK bank account. And for clients where the shareholder is a subsidiary company in the UK, the shareholding is abroad, the banks will often see it as too risky to open you a bank account, and will therefore not even consider your application, regardless of the size or the scope or the opportunity that the UK business holds. They just don't see it's worth the paperwork of going through the compliance checks they need to do, where the directors and the shareholders are based abroad. Some banks in the UK will have a caveat that you must have a UK-based director. I believe HSBC's currently is to have 2 UK-based statutory directors. So for many of our clients, some of the UK banks are automatically ruled out based on the structure and the ownership that you have. For lots of our clients, they will try their overseas bank initially for the process. So if you're from the Nordics, you might consider SEB or Handelsbanken, for example. If you bank with Swedbank, I don't believe they have any UK presence, so you might struggle with those. But again, there's some of these some of these banks now have started to introduce annual charges for having a solution when historically it used to be free. Lots of them again won't consider your banking, especially if they don't bank your home market banking. And even if they do, they still are not necessarily interested in SME banking within the UK. So everybody face the challenges around getting a UK bank account. If you get an opportunity through somebody, even if there is a cost attached to it, it's almost worth taking because it might be your only opportunity to get an account. There are some online solutions available, such as Revolut for Business, which again will provide you with a platform through which you can start to trade and you can start to do business. There are some restrictions and you do have limited protection in terms of funds that you hold within that account. But for clients which are looking to set up a bank account and looking to start to trade quickly, Revolut could be the solution for you to consider. It is worth bearing in mind if you are looking to apply for a sponsorship license and you are looking at moving individuals from abroad into the UK as part of your expansion process, then you would not be able to use a Revolut account as part of the application for that. You would need a traditional bank account. And as I said, that process can take, what it says on there, anywhere really from 3, 6, 9 months, depending on the relationships which you've got with the banks which you'll be applying for. So it's kind of worth stepping back, looking at who you've applied for already, considering your home market banking, and then looking at these online solutions as potential options to begin. And in terms of the online solutions, you can use them temporarily and then later transfer into your main bank account if you then get one open. So bank accounts are challenging. It will take you a long time, but it's a challenge which everybody faces as part of the expansion. HMRC, the tax authority, quite traditional again in their approach. So lots of paper forms which need to be submitted, lots of writing to you if they have things on fines and penalties. So be mindful of that. I touched on corporation tax already, but the standard rate currently is 25%, even though there's a small business one at 19%. VAT registration, the threshold got announced yesterday as part of the budget that will be increasing from £85,000 to £90,000 from April. You can voluntarily register if you wish and you're maybe in a reclaim position, so that's worth considering. VAT is obviously value-added tax on the sales of goods and services. PAYE is pay as you earn, so the social costs. So if you have employees, you are registered for PAYE, then notify the tax authority that you have UK employees, and Goodwill can help you with all of these registrations if required. From a hiring perspective, things to consider. So anybody that you hire within the UK, you have a legal obligation to make sure they have a right to work. National insurance number, passport, so they've obviously got the nationality, then they're the things that you should be looking for as part of the process. Again, you have a legal obligation to make sure they have an employment contract from their first working day. You used to have a grace period of, I think, 30 days a couple of years ago, but now the first working day, they must have the signed employment contract in place. And as a minimum, they must have a disciplinary and grievance policy as well as part of being here in the UK and having UK employees. Employers' liability insurance, again, is mandatory. So to protect you in case of a workplace injury, you need to make sure you've got the relevant level of cover. Pension in the UK is a mandatory benefit. So a workplace pension scheme must be put in place if you register for PAYE, and contributions must be made into that for the employees, from the employee and from the employer. So those costs are mandatory unless the individual decides to opt out of the scheme voluntarily, but their default position is they will be put into a pension scheme. Health and safety is an obligation. If you have 5+ employees, you must have a health and safety policy as well. That's something to consider. And the movement of people we've touched on briefly already, but if you've got individuals from abroad that you're looking at moving into the UK, obviously post-Brexit, we no longer have the free movement of people cross-border. So it will be probably a longer process and more difficult than before to get those individuals into the UK. There's lots of different options when it comes to it. Have a conversation with our HR team because there might be quicker routes than some of the longer ones. There is a business visitor visa that we run, which has gone through some changes over the past few weeks again, so explore that. If you're coming to the UK for short-term assignments, maybe to train staff or to kind of do internal things, you might be able to use the business visitor visa. But if you're looking at moving individuals on a more permanent basis or for longer term, you might have to go through the route of sponsorship licenses and then skilled worker visas or other types of visas as part of that process. And that really can be a long process. So to apply for the sponsorship license, you will be required to have the UK bank account. So in order, you require the UK entity, you will require the UK bank account, and then you will have to apply for a sponsorship license. You will also need an authorising officer, a person that carries responsibility towards that sponsorship scheme based within the UK to do the application process. And then only when the sponsorship license has been granted, you can then apply for the individual visas. So we would estimate that process being 6, 9, even 12 months to be able to get through that process of bringing individuals into the UK. So consider, if it's part of your expansion journey, then you need to consider that early on and start the process probably longer than maybe you anticipated if you want to bring those first hires in from abroad. We look on to the next slide. So I just wanted to briefly touch on some of the things which I hear clients say, or clients that have joined us then maybe decide to exit the UK for some reason, just in a little bit more detail. So the first one would be, I don't need help, I can do it myself. And I think this is a mentality, especially an entrepreneurial mentality. Lots of our clients, I speak to the founders and the CEOs and the senior management team who say they can do it themselves. In which case, fine. I would always question whether you should be spending your time researching it and trying to make sure you do it correctly when there are people and lots of resources available to help you. We also find if you do it yourself and maybe you do it incorrectly or you get it wrong, there's definitely a risk in terms of rectifying those problems. And we see that often with clients who decide to register themselves for VAT, for example, but don't understand necessarily the ongoing requirements around making tax digital and the filing of these returns. And the cost to rectify those issues and the fines and the penalties for under submissions or late submissions often outweighs the cost of just getting someone to do it correctly from the first time round. So consider if you do have the knowledge and the skills and if it's worth the time of trying to work it out yourself in-house, or whether you should maybe look for additional support. So that's one thing that's definitely worth bearing in mind. This one makes me feel a bit sad sometimes because I always mention it when I speak to companies at the beginning. But there's a lot of opportunity in the UK, but it's also very, very competitive. So I think some people come into the UK market and don't fully understand how long it will take to maybe get traction in the UK. They see all the number of people that are based here. They see all the opportunity. They think there's loads of people based here. It would be very easy in terms of getting traction in the market. And they often say it will take you 3 times as long and cost you 3 times as much to get traction within the UK market. So I think people come here not fully understanding how long it will take them to get some traction within the market. And after they've maybe ploughed tens of thousands into the UK and funded it into company on a loan agreement, they often say, oh no, we're going to pull out because we just don't know the market. Maybe there's competition here that they're not aware of. And I think not understanding the market and making the decision to come here can be very risky. And we see clients that it costs them a lot of money and they don't have the funding to be able to stick it out longer term. And therefore they miss the opportunity because they came in not fully understanding what the market truly was. And we've got lots of partners, again, that we could introduce to that can do market research and analysis reports and lead generation and that kind of thing to help you have a full understanding as to what the UK market offers. So you can make a clue decision as to just hoping that the UK is good based on the size of the market. And as I said, don't underestimate the competition. You might be unique back in your home market, but I would say the likelihood is there's someone that's doing something very similar to you in the UK market. And we see that time after time again, not fully understanding your competition within the UK when you expand here. The final point that I wanted to mention was the one of I have known them for years, it will be fine. Again, like we see this time after time where maybe you come into the UK market and you've had a relationship with somebody who has been your agent or your distributor in the UK and you get on with them really well and you say, I'll bring those on now as the employee, but I've known them for years, so it'll be okay. Maybe it's a supplier or someone that you've worked with for ages and you don't necessarily get the right sales agreements or terms and conditions in place with them. Sadly, in the UK, there is a bit of a sue culture. So if the relationship breaks down for any reason, you can kind of almost expect it to go to court or trying to look for settlement. We've seen disgruntled employees from our clients many a time where for health and safety reasons or for whatever reason it might be, it ends in a settlement agreement to avoid it from going to court. And the employees have the fact that they haven't had a right contract put in place or they haven't got the right terms. and there is that sue culture, sadly, within the UK. So you need to protect yourself from any matters that you go into, or any case that you go into, from an employee perspective, from a supplier perspective, from a customer perspective. Make sure you have the right paperwork signed before you start to do business, purely to protect yourself from any maybe settlement cases or situations that might occur in the future, because that is a massive risk that we see. Finally, what if it doesn't work out? And again, it's maybe a bit negative, but we see some clients that come in and then after, I don't know, 6-12 months to say it's not the right market, we need to leave the market. How can we get out? And in terms of exit in the UK, it is fairly straightforward, which is good. So assuming you have no liabilities and you haven't racked up lots of debt within the UK, and it is a simple closure, it is easy to exit. You would deregister for VAT, you would close your bank account, and then you would apply to Companies House to remove the company from the register. There is also the ability to have the entity transferred to a dormant status, where it is then there should you decide to activate it in the future. But it is fairly simple to close down the operation, and especially if the employees are within the first 2 years as well. It's usually fairly straightforward with some guidance to be able to exit, and that's not stopping you from setting up again in the future as well, just so you know. So that is still an option, even if it doesn't work out the first time round. But hopefully after 6-12 months, you wouldn't consider that, and you will fully understand what the UK market has in terms of being able to offer you before you come into the market. That is a quick rundown in terms of our advice and the timeline in terms of actually setting up within the UK for you to take away. Nancy will circulate it afterwards to you all as well. And if you've got any questions, or if you have any comments one-to-one, or if you'd like to have a session specifically about you and your journey to the UK, more than happy to do so. Nancy, are there any questions or anything? Or if anybody's got any questions, there's a minute or so, you can drop them into the chat.
Yeah, if anyone does have any questions, just use the function at the bottom of your screen. Give it a few seconds. Just one thing, we do have a whole calendar of seminars on more specific topics mentioned in the session today. So that could be bank account focused, HMRC focused, employee matters, finance, governance, everything. So we do sessions that are a lot more kind of informative and specific to those kind of things, and they're all on our website.
Cool.
Doesn't look like we have any questions.
Fine. In which case, we will leave it there. Thank you, everybody, for your time. Thank you for joining. And if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out to Nancy or myself. Bye.
Amazing.
Bye. Bye.
Recording at the end, so that's all sorted. Is that everything, James? You want to start?
Yep, cool, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining.